who is the most underrated person in history. There are two serial killers in U.S. history that have racked up more kills, less fame, and brutal beyond compare. One Highway of Tears killer, 50+ and counting, than the Mexico cartel killers in El Paso. Hundreds of people dead, most were put in hydrochlorocast, alive. Feet first. It took days to die. The real body count is unknown, but the assumption is anywhere between 250 to 500 bodies. Then you have H.H. Holmes, who killed numerous folk all different way, during the time of Jack the Ripper. Some older answers from years ago when this thread popped up. Archduke Ferdinand is best remembered for his assassination, which caused WWI. The reality of the situation is that WWI would have happened whether he was involved or not. Austria was just looking for an excuse to attack Serbia. Cleopatra wasn't the most impressive Egyptian ruler, that would be Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut accomplished far more for her nation, and she was the only woman to act as pharaoh that was native to Egypt. Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian, she was Greek. If you can predict the future, maybe write it in plain text. Nostradamus apparently predicted this future, but he recorded his findings in poems that could be interpreted to match any event. Did you know that Pythagoras didn't even invent the Pythagorean theorem, A2 plus B2 equals C2? One of his students actually did, and he stole it. To be fair, he did make it better and proved it, but the student is the one that started the whole thing. Guy Fawkes didn't orchestrate everything, he was just a minor cog in a conspiracy that he didn't even know that much about. He was tasked with the simple objective that he failed. Then, he snitched on every co-conspirator he knew about. He had one job, and he managed to mess up three. Also, Waldo was a top answer last time as well. Never change Reddit. I mean, they've got a point. Between the population explosion in developing countries and the rise of social media and the internet in the last 40 years, historical figures are gonna have a hard time being more overrated than anyone still alive now. We only have a handful of shitty third-party accounts of what Genghis Khan was actually like as a person, whereas Mark Zuckerberg has had their entire life documented, biographied and sensationalized over and over again, and probably will continue to for years after he dies. Yeah, and essentially since he was so insignificant his tomb hadn't been raided and ransacked. Everyone else's had been because, you know, some of those tombs are 5,000 years old. You think grave robbers wouldn't steal gold and stuff from a pharaoh's tomb for 5,000 years? Of course they would. So we had never really seen, and photographed, what the tombs looked like untouched. But Tut's tomb was found so late because the entrance had been buried, I believe. Tut makes me sad, man. I recently read that scientists found that the tunic he wore to his coronation as a child had little ducks lovingly stitched into it. He was just a kid, just like we once were. He wanted to wear his favorite outfit to his special celebration. We've lost so much of our ancestors, sometimes it's hard to remember they lived and died just like we do. That they had their own family, their own loves, their own favorite colors and their own favorite animals. Something about that really gets me. I'll admit I'm soft, but something aches in me when I think about how they lived and worked to make their mark on the world, no matter how small. That they're gone now, but everything they left behind calls to us like a desperate plea to not forget them. Or maybe it's not that deep. Maybe Tut just like the duck tunic. History just makes me wanna curl up and cry sometimes. Charles Manson can, for all intents and purposes, eat a dick. First of all, he wasn't some criminal serial killer mastermind. He was a slighted drug-addicted hippie with a god complex. He may have had followers and instructed them to kill, but it wasn't part of some grand design. First of all, to the uninitiated, Manson didn't actually kill anyone himself. Since I learned that, it kind of shatters the serial killer boogeyman image he has. Tex Watson was his lieutenant who was in person in charge of the Tate and LaBianca murders. The Manson family didn't have the highest kills of any serial killer, nor were they as violent as other murderers like Dahmer, Norris and Whitaker, or Albert Fish. While the Mansons did get notoriety from killing actress Sharon Tate, she wasn't even the real target. Charlie had been to 10,050 Kilo Drive before to pitch a record deal that failed. Since, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate had bought the house, so it was effectively random. The others killed by the Mansons, the LaBiancas, were middle-aged supermarket owners, not exactly the kind of people in prime fighting shape, and yet Manson gets all the credit. To quote my wife, Charles Manson is a pussy boy. Yeah, overrated is not the same as shouldn't be famous. For what it's worth, I think Christopher Columbus gets my vote for overrated. Kids think he's some explorer genius who was the only one that thought the world was round, when in actuality it was widely accepted the earth was round and he miscalculated the circumference, used the wrong estimate and should have died before reaching the Indies, but lucked out there was a continent, which he wasn't aware of, right where he'd normally have begun running out of supplies and starved. Fortunately, in the last couple decades his hype has been dying down. Gandhi, he didn't really win India freedom, WW2 did. His support of the Caliphate movement gave a big boost to Muslim separatism in India. His agreement to partition resulted in 1 million deaths. His idea of self-sufficient villages resulted in India continuing to remain poor and backward and failing to industrialize. His promotion of Nehru over far more competent leaders in the Congress. I can go on. Edit. Lots of comments saying he was racist. Yes, but that was early in his life. He changed considerably later, and the Gandhi we know as Mahatma was not a racist. Not in all history, but Chris McCandless was a fucking moron who does not deserve to be romanticized. Against all advice, he strolled out into the Alaskan wilderness with no idea what he was doing, with no map, underprepared, undersupplied and with no research into seasonal dangers, smashed up some cabins, shot a moose despite not being able to preserve or store the meat, thought he could teach himself to identify edible wild mushrooms, didn't look beyond the river crossing he initially used where he would have found a hand-operated cable car half a mile away and died, probably from eating strange seeds, in an abandoned bus on a known hunting trail. He was not pioneering, or inspiring, or bold, or free, he was fucking stupid, and somehow this inspires people. Have you actually read the book Into the Wild? I think it actually does a really good job of showing his foolishness and how what he did devastated his loved ones. He was selfish and naive. The author uses McCandless' story as a parallel to his own similar feelings, and to explain to all the young men and women who may feel a similar way that there is a softer, smarter way to do what McCandless did. I love the book and think it gets a bad rep because people go around pointing out the obvious like it's some big secret. That's the whole point of why his story became famous. Even the movie, which admittedly does romanticize him a bit, is a tragedy. It doesn't take the brightest person to read between the lines and see he wasn't a role model. His importance is not based on being there first. There are people already living there. And yes, Erik Erikson got to Vinland around 1000 AC, but his arrival was meaningless and uneventful in the long run, as opposed to Columbus, which changed the world forever. Edit. I am trying to defend him. He was utter trash even by his times. Spaniards got him incarcerated for being too violent and cruel once he sailed back to Spain, and Isabel heard about his deeds. Hitler. Hear me out. National Socialism and anti-Semitism was not something he invented, and I am pretty sure that if it wasn't for him somebody else like Goebbels or Hess would have become German dictator. When people say, oh, if only Hitler wasn't born then WW2 or the Shoah would not have happened, that's utter bullshit. I wish while teaching about the Holocaust, people would put it into context. The climate of polarization in the 1920s in Germany is very similar to what is going on now in the USA. People were and are seeking out extremists with conspiracy theories to follow because they look for scapegoats. The man on the top is just a symptom for a systemic problem which lies much deeper. Would someone like Goebbels or Hess have been able to gather enough support? I'm sure that not everyone who supported Hitler actually believed in his more radical ideas. Without a charismatic, eloquent and passionate leader like Hitler, and without all of the puzzle pieces, like the Great Depression and the Reichstag fire, coming together, it's possible that things would have gone very differently. You're right though, polarization was at an all-time high, and if not Hitler, then it is likely that another radical group would have emerged victorious in an embarrassed, damaged and divided Germany. I agree that the stage was set for a leader with Hitler's ideals to take power. However, I don't know if it would have escalated as quickly without Hitler's ability to persuade. On paper, leaders knew he was unstable and to be cautious, but when they sat face to face with him, he was able to convince them that he would stop after restoring Germany. He was also a very convincing public speaker. I don't speak German, but I can see the power and confidence in his speeches. I am opposed to everything that he chose to do with his ability to inspire, but I will acknowledge that he was very good at it. It reminds me of Lavander's words about Voldemort and Harry Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. You're wrong. Hitler was absolutely instrumental in the destruction of the Weimar Republic, and he was very clearly a political genius. Evil, obviously, but he was incredibly charismatic and knew exactly where the weak points were in German society leading up to the Stat takeover in 1933. He built a party from essentially nothing and had the wherewithal and brutality to turn on threats at exactly the right time before and after he won the German chancellorship. Others like Göring and Goebbels played their part, but it was Hitler who built the totalitarian Germany of WW2. While this comment is fair, most of Putin's support nowadays on internet is just mumming and trolling. He was actually respected 20-ish years ago when he pulled Russia through tough times economy-wise, even then by mostly old folk who admire his KGB accomplishments and whatnot. I've heard that in modern time Russia he is not liked at all, which is not surprising. He just has a lot of influence. I think, unfortunately for us in the present day, Putin will be remembered as a great historical figure, the word great in this context not meaning good or beneficial to the world, but wow, that is impressive. He has done a phenomenal job of accruing and holding onto power. If your goal is to become needlessly powerful and fuck everyone else, he provides an excellent model. Given the multitude of selfish shitty people in the world, I can see why he has a fan base. Unpopular opinion. So was Nikola Tesla. Don't get me wrong, Tesla's inventions revolutionized the world and his name absolutely deserves to be synonymous with science. But so many people think that Tesla was the only worthwhile inventor of his age. The oatmeal even goes as far as to insinuate that Tesla is responsible for every invention from the turn of the 20th century, which is BS. Guglielmo Marconi is responsible for proving the feasibility of radio waves, while Thomas Murray invented the fuse box which allowed for the safe transmission of electricity through a power grid. Heck, Edison isn't without his accomplishments either. He may not have invented the light bulb, but he made it commercially viable. Edit. Apparently this is not as an unpopular opinion as I thought. There's a great podcast called The Turning which gives pretty nuanced view of Mother Teresa and her ministry, Missionaries of Charity. They talk with a lot of the sisters that were involved in her ministry, and it gives you a pretty good idea of her philosophies. Missionaries of Charity kind of became this behemoth that lent itself to abuse, and it's not always clear the role Mother Teresa really had in these abuses. I definitely think she had some fucked up ideas about living a godly, moral life, but it's clear she had a fairly positive impact on many of the people around her. Ronald Reagan, huge increase in the budget deficit, throwing big military money at a Cold War that was already won, Soviet Union collapsing internally, dumb deregulation, big increases in pollution, biggest moves to increase income and wealth inequality, and one of the big things he gets credit for was mid-80s economic expansion, which was the result of Volcker taming inflation. Top Reagan advisor admits the tax cuts growth claim was a myth. https://www.washingtonpost.com/news/posteverything/wp/28/09/28/ I helped create the GOP tax myth. Trump is wrong. Tax cuts don't equal growth/ It gets big positive ratings from media and the public, somewhat above average from historians, very overrated. He's easily one of the most likable and charismatic presidents in recent history, but if you actually look at his policies and what they resulted in, he was objectively pretty terrible. In addition to what you listed, he ignored the AIDS epidemic, expanded the war on drugs resulting in mass incarceration of non-violent drug offenders and wasting millions of dollars, got rid of the Fairness Amendment, which would eventually lead to the mass polarization in media we see today, anti-union, and famously shut down plenty of major strikes, greatly contributing to the decline of organized labor and further increasing income inequality, refused to renew the Clean Air Act, Iran-Contra, sold weapons to Iran in order to illegally fund the Contras in Nicaragua, which ultimately destabilized the country in a civil war, funded Afghani rebel groups against the Soviets, ultimately leading to the rise of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. In fairness, this was started under Carter, but Reagan continued it throughout his full term, cut funding for federal mental asylums, resulting in an increase in homelessness. A while ago someone on Reddit had a great comment that yes, while most of Freud's theories ended up not being true, he put on the path of finding discovery, and that mental illness wasn't just evil spirits or some incurable mystery. Imagine we're cavemen who had to walk everywhere and Freud showed up with a cart and square wheels. At the time, it would seem revolutionary to cavemen, but looking back now square wheels suck. But because of the square wheels idea, another caveman was like, what if we make them oval instead? Then a couple of years later, another one said we should make them round. Has not really remembered for being correct though. Most of his theories are wrong, some are really wrong, and you're taught about that when you learn about him. Although he was wrong, he was really the first person to attempt to formulate a theory for the mind and to develop that theory semi-scientifically. Most of the ancient Greek scientists, philosophers were wrong, and some of their theories make Freud's look tame, but that doesn't make their work any less important. Charles de Gaulle, MF, was an officer of the army that lost half of France in 2 weeks to the Germans in WW2, flees like a cockroach to the UK where somehow embodies the spirit of the resistance, somehow receives the title of general, even though his tasks were not dangerous nor fundamental. When the Allies take over France, he is not in any of the strategic discussions among generals of different armies. Nonetheless, he walks into Paris as their great liberator. Couple of years later gets elected president, because somehow he has managed to keep his popularity. While president, North African colonies declare war and independence from France. Many people die, and the French economy and territories takes a huge blow. Also, he managed to dismantle the oldest European university of the world, Université de Paris. But now, his name is on an airport, many avenues and countless plazas across France. Small tidbit to correct: the North African colonies had already started fighting for independence by the time he came to power. In fact, he took over with the introduction of the Fifth Republic, which came as a result of these independence movements that effectively made the Fourth Republic fall. Still, he doubled down on war efforts to keep the colonies, until he realized they were wasting lives and money on these efforts, as well as the fact that they were losing face on the international scene because of the Algerian War. Almost everything you said is factually wrong, so your whole opinion of the man is absolute garbage. Before starting to review your bullshit, I need to preface everything by saying I'm not a de Gaulle fan. Absolutely not. But I despise him for actual legit reason, not stupid revisionism like you do. MF was an officer of the army that lost half of France in 2 weeks to the Germans in WW2. De Gaulle is literally one of the only French officer that had some result during the early days of the war. https://fr.wikipedia.org/wiki/but8__Montcornet. Flees like a cockroach to the UK. De Gaulle was asked to be present at the Bright Air Conference. He was present there because he had just been named State Secretary and was acting as an official for the government, and not the army, which at the time had already fled Paris BTW. There he met Churchill, and since de Gaulle was one of the only French to wish for France to stay in war, the two really liked each other. And since the French government had decided to surrender, de Gaulle decided to leave for London. Here somehow embodies the spirit of the resistance.